on the prisons, candidate?
One supplementary piece on the prisons, and just when Deputy Kenny was speaking about the addiction services, going back to the women's prisons in Docus in particular, obviously Limerick caters for people who have much longer sentences, primarily even from Dublin. But in Docus is a particular concern that the huge bulk of people who are there are suffering from sexual trauma, from addiction, from mental health issues, and Dr. Kenny quite rightly highlights that in many respects. The new justice strategy, which tries to minimise short sentences, in particular I would suggest, is particularly important for women who are in and out of Docus on very short sentences, and the effect being that there's no real opportunity in that context to have any sort of addiction programme, any education programme, any mental health programme, any rape crisis centre support, which I see is such an important part of the work actually in Limerick. But if I could just use this opportunity to emphasise so strongly, in particular for women who, if they go into prison for 2 months, you might lose your kids, you might lose your home, everything is gone and nothing is fixed. The opportunity through the justice strategy to really make it clear to the judiciary that short sentences, in particular for women, are just deeply inappropriate because there's no opportunity for them to get what they, the sort of break from the difficulties that they might benefit from otherwise.
It's a consistent comment from all of the services within the prison service that it's not possible to give people treatment if they're on less than a 1 year prison service, and that continues to be the situation, and we know the impact is more severe on women. And one of the things I certainly learned in travelling around to prisons is that, and it was very striking, that men in prison get a significant amount of visitors. Women in prison get very few, if no visitors. It was very, very striking. They all told me the same thing, and it was something that really, really stood out. And I think it's why the facilities in Limerick, for example, are so important, that they maximise the facilities where women can receive visitors, in particular from their children or their immediate family. But I think the loneliness hits women an awful lot harder by the lack of visitors. There's no question about that.
And no money either. People don't leave money for the tuck shop also, which actually in many respects, in speaking with the Governor in Limerick, I'm also a member of the Public Accounts Committee, and I don't ever want a situation where we're criticising the Governor for going out and getting different types of, whether it's period products or shampoo or different things to make that just a little bit more comfortable. I think the discretionary spend there to be able to provide women with what they need is very, very important. Recognising that, we know families who might come in and leave 50 quid for a man and nothing at all for a woman, and it's not just you and I saying this, Minister, this is what we're hearing back from every quarter. So.
Yeah, no, certainly something I was very conscious of when it was raised with me when I was in those prisons as well, and I know from Minister McEntee as well. So it's something that all I can say at this point is we're aware of it, and it's something that's very much being looked at.
Thank you.
Thank you. I might just put in a question myself, Minister, just following up on that last exchange in regard to prisoners purchasing items within the prisons, and Deputy Carmenia mentioned the tuck shop, etc., and various products that prisoners may wish to buy. It was brought to my attention before that there was a issue in some prisons where prisoners, say families, couldn't lodge money for them to be held on account or held on a credit system. Some of the prisoners may not have bank accounts. Economic literacy, or indeed any literacy, may be an issue in some cases. And I understand it, and in at least one prison, if not a couple of prisons, I think some prisons might operate a credit system where people can lodge monies and it sits against someone's sort of ledger, but some don't. I don't know if you're in a position to comment on that, Minister, or perhaps you could have that looked into.
So my understanding is that during COVID, that system was revamped. So it should be possible for most prisoners at this point to be able to do that, but I'll certainly get you more detail on it. It's not contained in the estimates, but I will get you more detail on it.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so that we took the prisoners vote at the outset. So I'm going to take next then vote 20, Garda Síochána. So we will go around the table and any question we have on that, and then we'll do the same thing for each subhead. So moving to the Garda vote, vote 20. Deputy Carol McNeill, do you want to?
Okay, a couple of questions, please. Minister, you had some really strong announcements that I certainly support hugely around the expansion of the Garda Youth Diversion Programme recently and the consultation in relation to 18 to 24-year-olds. And I note that I think you secured an additional 6 or 7 million for the Garda Youth Diversion projects. I know some of that came historically from last year as well, but it looks to me like you have a budget of about 30 million. Is that 30 million additional to can you just set out what and also where does, and forgive me if I'm asking you now and it's not appropriate, but to me that seems within the Garda vote, but I just don't see it displayed just in your speech, maybe elsewhere, but just to point me to that. And so can you just set out the additional funds that you've received there?
Yeah. So last year we received an additional 6.7 million euros for the youth diversion project, and this year was an additional 2.5 million, so a total of 9.2 million. It's coming off a base of approximately 14 million euros, so it's a significant increase in the space of two budgets. And our priorities with the youth diversion projects, in terms of the initial funding, is to first of all get.
Did you say 14, 6, and 2? Is that it?
No, yeah, so 16.7 plus 2.5, so it's 9.2 million increase in the space of two budgets.
Yeah.
It's coming off a base of approximately 14 to 15 million euros.
Yeah, fair enough, yeah.
Is what we were kind of starting with. Plus there was some one-off funding in the Youth Justice when I got there as well in relation to Greentown and a few other specialised projects. So that's the basis coming off of, so it's increased very significantly. It's actually contained in the Justice vote rather than the Garda Síochána vote. But
Sorry.
it's and I suppose in terms of the strategy, the first priority is to get full national coverage, and we approved only last week for the advertisement for youth diversion projects in areas where there still remains to be coverage. Part of Mayo, part of Cavan, part of Tipperary, and the fourth one escapes me at the moment. But for full national coverage, we've also been increasing the allocation to provide family support workers and also early intervention workers. So that's the kind of 8 to 11-year-olds. They don't need to be referred by the justice system, but can be identified through TUSLA or other agencies as well as our own. And then we've also now started the consultation around the 18 to 24-year-olds. Most youth services do extend to 24-year-olds. We do, of course, have to be careful. What will work for a 15-year-old won't necessarily work for a 22-year-old. And as I say, one 20-year-old can be going on 12. The next, in terms of mentality, another 20-year-old could be heading up a serious criminal organisation. So we do have to have this very extensive consultation to see what parts of the youth service can be extended and what parts are appropriate to extend and what we shouldn't be. And also our youth workers will have to be trained very differently as well, depending on who they are dealing with. But we have also our research programme called REP down in the University of Limerick, headed up by Sean Redmond, and they've won a number of awards as well. So I think we are heading towards a world-class youth justice service. We're increasingly getting visits from international, or interest from international other countries' youth services to see what we're doing, how we're doing it, and why we're doing it. There's a lot we can still learn from others as well. The whole purpose is to divert people away from criminal activity. A lot of young people who end up on the pathway to criminal activity, the earlier you can intervene, the more you can direct them away. Often, and we know this, an awful lot of criminal activity among young people is trauma-informed. They're coming maybe from a chaotic family backgrounds. Sometimes you have parents who want to do their very best, but whereas we're finding now sometimes in Dublin in particular that the parents are good parents, but they're the children of drug addicts maybe, and they didn't maybe get taught the skills that they need to do maybe appropriate parenting. So that's where I think the family support part comes in as well. So it does. And then sometimes, unfortunately, the family can actually be the source of the criminal motivations as well and activity. And so we're trying to approach the entire youth justice situation with appropriate interventions. And the vast majority of young people actually react very well to interventions. And we've seen so many, I've certainly seen travelling around the country meeting youth diversion projects, so many young people have actually gone on through the system and actually now, for example, down in Bandon, there was a young woman there in her mid-20s who is now a social worker, graduated from UCC. She told me straight out that if she hadn't been in a youth diversion project, she'd have been down the same path as her friends, and God knows where she would have ended up. So the record is there on the ground. REP in Limerick is putting the empirical evidence to support that as well, and the youth justice is learning from each other. So I think it's, as I said, there's a lot we can still learn, there's a lot we can still do better, but youth justice is I think, certainly heading very much in the right direction, and I have to say Minister McAtee has been a great support of it as well there in the Department of Justice.
One of the, I agree with all of that, and I'm sorry, obviously that's in the Justice vote, the GYDP, but obviously the JLOs presumably lie within the Garda budget, so that's where so let's just keep going with that anyway. One of the gaps, or one of the points of concern, is if there's a decision by the what's the name of the office in Harcourt Street that makes the decisions? The Gardaí Youth Diversion Office essentially that makes the decision to prosecute or not, or whether to go on the programme or not. One of the concerns that I've had for many, many years is that when a welfare referral is made, instead of, that is the outcome, or whether it's a welfare referral or maybe an anger management course or a sexual therapy course or whatever else. What I don't see within that office is the capacity to audit that, to make sure that that did in fact happen by TUSLA. And it is a quasi-judicial office, that office in Harcourt Street, making those decisions about whether to prosecute or not a young person. And as you say, Minister, to either allow them into the criminal justice system with all of the effects we know that has, or not. If the decision is that we're not going to prosecute because we're going to put somebody on a course to try to manage whatever sexual feelings, in the case of a sexual assault case or welfare referral, if that office doesn't have the capacity to audit whether or not those referrals have taken place, and I note that there remains, to my knowledge, not a person from TUSLA actually situated in the office, then it's a big gap. And I think, it's something that the Section 44 Committee has been highlighting for many, many years, to oversee the implementation of the effectiveness of the GYDP programme. And I also note that the annual reports of the Monitoring Committee haven't been published since 2019. And I don't understand why, because they used to be published pretty efficiently.
I'll have to see why they're not being published. My understanding is they will come through via the Garda Síochána as opposed to the Youth Diversion Project itself.
They do. They come through the Garda Síochána to the Minister's office, to the department, and then they're published.
Yeah, look, I'll have to inquire as to why that is the case, Deputy. So, well, I don't have any information on that to hand here in terms of the estimates.
Okay. Right, that's okay. Thank you very much. On the other part, on I note that there are 92 Gardaí started or trainee Gardaí started in Templemore yesterday, which is obviously very welcome. And I note that there was difficulties with recruitment this year, and clearly there's a sort of an underspend on that you've accounted for. What is the look? There's lots of different reasons for that, and it's very to look to the future. But what is the plan in terms of recruitment that's going to be different next year to this, to make sure that we don't have that underspend? It's not an underspend that we welcome in any way. Obviously, we want to see Gardaí being trained and coming out.
No, absolutely. So the last year earlier this year, the recruitment call, if you like, was very successful. Over 11,000 expressions of interest. We've now the first intake started, as you correctly say, yesterday with 92, and we expect to be taking in 200 every 8 weeks from next year, beginning with February, bringing in a total of 1,000 Garda Síochána through this current recruitment process. I think the recruitment process itself have been successful in the sense that we will get the 1,000 Gardaí out of those. I think what has happened is there has been delays in terms of getting the first, if you like, group of those Garda Síochána into Templemore. I think that has been as a result mostly of COVID. Yeah. And it's a little bit like getting, the training machine back up and going again once it had closed down. But once we have it going, and we do now, the momentum will be there to keep those coming in, and we have the full setup. So we're very confident that we'll have we'll hit that 1,000 mark by the end of next year. At the very least, in training. Obviously, the ones who start next December won't qualify for a period after that. We'll also be starting a new recruitment process early next year. We have gone through the last recruitment process. Yeah. Obviously, it wasn't perfect. To see where we can streamline the recruitment process, where we can speed it up, and because I think, again, with applicants, they like to see that momentum too. If they're waiting around, they might find alternative careers and pathways, which is natural for younger people as well. So how we can do that. So we'll certainly take learnings from the recruitment process. There are learnings we can certainly take from them.
Thank you. It looks like there's essentially a 33% increase on the overtime budget, and that's with having accounted for the underspend on recruitment there, just in your notes. It's a pretty extraordinary not overspend but additional spend in relation to overtime, and I note that the very significant reasons for that are the investigation of organised and serious crime, which remains a significant concern for An Garda Síochána, a significant risk to members of An Garda Síochána, and I just wanted to see, did you want to elaborate on that in any greater detail, Minister, because it's a huge concern, obviously, for me, for the committee, for yourself.
No, absolutely. Look, the overtime, as you know from last year, there was a number of concerns raised by the general public in relation to antisocial behaviour, and also significant successes around organised crime in terms of drugs and the criminals themselves. So an awful lot of extra work was put into those types of programmes and Operation Citizen to try and increase the high visibility and the challenges we've seen in terms of Cherry Orchard and Ballyfermot as well. So all of those are leading to increased Garda overtime, and because I suppose the lack of recruitment has resulted in maybe, you're relying on the existing force rather than having extra Gardaí on the ground who can take up that additional work as required as well. So we would expect and certainly hope with additional Garda coming on stream next year that perhaps there won't be as much in reliance on overtime, but I think to a certain degree the Garda Síochána is a demand-led service, unfortunately, and where in a year particular issues arise that maybe we haven't anticipated, we will ensure that the Garda deploy the resources first, and then we'll come in here and deal with the overtime if that's what's in the estimates, if that's what was needed.
Deputy